if you have a leaky sexual container and your sexual energy is leaking in all sorts of different places, objectification of women in public, some fantasy here and there, some pornography use. If you're not preserving your sexual energy for your wife, are you having a compromised sexual experience with her? Right. And again, some of this stuff isn't backed by science. It's a lot of just conjecture. But I'll tell you from personal experience, if I work really, really hard to preserve my sexual energy, my sexual container, if I don't have leaks in it and I preserve it for my wife, the sex that her and I have is better. It's way better. And I would encourage you guys, if you haven't tried that, to try it, because I think you're going to find, why have a leaky sexual container where you're having a bunch of substandard sexual experiences when you can have one amazing sexual experience, and you can only have it if you preserve that container. Is pornography that bad? It's a question that comes up quite often. Now, while 90% of men choose to cut out pornography, cut out masturbation, there's about 10% of men that are a bit undecided. Is porn that bad, right? It's a question that comes up. And for these 10% of men, here's the problem. If you don't have a clear stance on pornography, if you're kind of like, I kind of don't want to do it, but I kind of also don't think it's a big deal. If you have a ambiguous, wishy-washy stance, I think you're going to keep watching it. Personally, I don't think you're going to stop. I think in order to stop watching pornography, if that's something that you want to do, I think you have to have a firm stance. And I think you have to have a dang good reason why you want to stop watching it. I really do. And it can't be just your wife's opinion, or even a religious view. I think it has to be a personal stance where you individually stand with pornography if you want to stop watching it. So I'm going to list off some of the most common reasons, the reasons why I chose to cut it out of my life and why most of the men in my groups have actually chose to cut it out of their life. I'm going to read some of these reasons, and for those of you that are on the fence, or if you're listening to this and you want to further strengthen your stance against it, I think this episode will help. So let's first start with kind of socially what this is doing, right? In terms of, is it bad? And then we'll kind of dive into what's this doing to you mentally and psychologically, and then what's this doing potentially to your wife, to your family. So socially, a big question is this consent, right? Is giving money to these women consent? I personally don't think so, right? I believe if these women were not getting paid, whether this be, social networks or, paid filmed pornography, if they weren't getting paid, I don't think we would see a lot of these women doing this. I don't think we would. And so therefore, it's hard for me to think that it's consent, even though they're being financially compensated. Because if we removed the financial compensation, they would stop. So to me, that's not consent. It's kind of a form of sexual slavery almost in the way I see it. So then of course, there's the question of, well, Roland, what if they're not asking for money? What if they're just filming themselves for free and putting it on the internet? Then I would start to question their mental health and understanding, right? Do you want to support, is that something that you want to support? Do you want to see a world where all these women are for free, just posting their naked bodies on the internet? Is that something you want to promote? Because by consuming that material, you're basically saying that's okay. Right. And I don't know. I think my personal stance is I don't think that's healthy. I don't think your desire to do that it's not the world that I really want to live in. And then of course the question, what about AI pornography? Right. So people will say, hey, well, Roland, these women never existed, right? They're computer generated. Well, then the question is, what's it doing to you? Right. Because if you know that person's not real, what's that doing to your brain, right? Or if you're training your brain to be aroused and attracted to artificially generated women, you can't tell me that's not having a negative effect overall, right? Eventually, are you going to become more attracted to virtual images than real women, right? And is that something that we want? And again, is that something that you want to promote and participate in, right? Because we have to remember, by consuming this content, you are supporting it, and you're making it more likely that other men and other boys are going to consume it, right? So is that something that you want to support? So let's dive into what's this doing to you personally. So personally, is this decreasing your ability to experience a bigger sexual potential? What I mean by that is, they call it like a leaky sexual container. If you have a leaky sexual container and your sexual energy is leaking in all sorts of different places, objectification of women in public, some fantasy here and there, some pornography use. If you're not preserving your sexual energy for your wife, are you having a compromised sexual experience with her? Right. And again, some of this stuff isn't backed by science. It's a lot of just conjecture, but I'll tell you from personal experience, if I work really, really hard to preserve my sexual energy, my sexual container, if I don't have leaks in it and I preserve it for my wife, the sex that her and I have is better. It's way better. And I would encourage you guys, if you haven't tried that, to try it, because I think you're going to find, why have a leaky sexual container where you're having a bunch of substandard sexual experiences when you can have one amazing sexual experience, and you can only have it if you preserve that container. So that's one philosophy. Another thought is pornography altering your view of women and therefore in turn compromising your ability to connect with them and interact with them. What I mean by this is if you're constantly viewing the female body as this sexual thing, what if you have an attractive coworker, or what if you're the boss or leader and one of your people on your team that you're leading is an attractive woman? Or what if your daughter has an attractive friend that comes over, right? Are you proud of the man you are when you have thoughts around these people, right? This is a minor, right? This is your daughter's friend, or this is somebody you're leading at work. Is it really appropriate for you to have sexual thoughts that cross your mind? Right. And I think the only way that we can really start to limit some of those thoughts, because again, we can't control our thoughts, but I do think that consuming pornography regularly definitely increases the likelihood of thoughts like that happening. So again, is pornography consumption altering your human experience and depriving you of more meaningful, real relationships, right? And then of course there's erectile dysfunction. Right. We know that we're seeing massive numbers of erectile dysfunction in young men. And again, we don't know for sure, but the biggest speculation is their pornography use. They're starting to not be able to perform with real sexual encounters because of all of the pornography that they've been consuming. All right, their brain is basically more stimulated by digital women than real women. And then there's this last one, which this one's, I don't know if you've seen this on social media, but there's a lot of people saying that our libido, our vitality, a lot of us think of libido as a sexual thing. But libido and vitality, this kind of hunger for life, there's a noticeable decrease. Anybody who's had an orgasm knows what I'm talking about, right? After you orgasm, there is this kind of dip in energy, in life force, right? So, is watching pornography and or masturbating, is this something you really want to do for your own energy levels, right? Is doing this throughout the week, the month, whatever, is this depriving you of energy that you would be better off channeling towards your career or self-improvement, learning a language, doing something else, right? So overall, depending on how much you're consuming this content, is it decreasing the energy levels that you're just bringing to life? And then the last one that I want to bring up, of course, is just our family, right? What's this doing to your wife? Regardless of where you stand on it, you can't tell me you don't care about how your wife feels. And regardless of whether she's okay with you watching pornography or not, I think first you need to make the decision for yourself whether she's okay with it or not. Is this something that you want in your life? Is this helping you? But a lot of women consider it cheating. I would say most women consider it cheating. And a lot of men don't take that very seriously, but I don't know. It kind of seems like cheating to me. I mean, you're staring at naked women who are not your wife, and more than likely than not, you're masturbating with these images. I don't know. Doesn't that kind of look like cheating? And again, for a lot of men, because pornography has unfortunately become so widely used and just really not taken seriously, it's easy to look at it and consider it not cheating. But I would just say this doesn't make your wife feel good. It's regardless of whether she's decided she's okay with it or not. A lot of women just they're offended that you need to supplement your sexual relationship with your wife with other women. It's just not, it doesn't make them feel that great. So, you have to consider that in terms of where this makes you stand as a husband. And then of course, as a father, right? Here's the last thing I'll leave you with. I have a young daughter. And here's something I think about quite often. Do I want my daughter's teacher, right? Let's say she's going into high school, middle school. Do I want her male teacher who's in his mid-30s? Do I want him My daughter is a beautiful little girl, and my guess is she's just going to keep getting more and more beautiful. Do I feel comfortable with the men who work at her school in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s? Do I feel comfortable with these men consuming pornography very regularly and masturbating? Are those the men that I want protecting my daughter? Are those the men that I want teaching my daughter? Right? Just ask yourself that, right? Would you feel safer in a world where men were not consuming large amounts of pornography semi-regularly or extremely regularly? Would it make you feel safer if men weren't doing this? Would you feel like they would potentially respect and honor your daughter more? And then let's elaborate that even further. Do you want your daughter's husband to be watching pornography regularly and the effects that might be having on his brain? Do you want your grandkids to be raised by a father who's regularly objectifying women? And the reason I'm bringing these examples up is the most common answer is no. I'd feel safer if these guys were not regularly objectifying women, right? I would feel safer if my grandkids were not being raised by a guy who feels like, feels entitled to objectify women regularly, who's not your daughter, right? This is your daughter's husband who's raising your grandkids, right? And the reason I bring these up is it's stuff like this that can rehumanize the situation. It can rehumanize the whole thing and start to make you gain a stance against pornography. So again, why did I record this episode? Because I really genuinely believe that you will not stop watching pornography unless you take a firm stance on it. You need to decide, is this something that I want to rid from the world? Right? Is this something that I do not believe is beneficial? It's toxic to our human existence. Because if you don't really have a firm stance on it, I think you'll find you'll be in these moods where you want to look at it. And I think because you haven't made up your mind, you'll look. Right? And so I bring this up just to put things on your radar. I don't think it's consent. I don't think it's healthy for men to be consuming this. I think it creates it dampens our experience, and I think it harms the experience for other women. I just don't think it's a good thing for us to be doing. And I also don't think that we should be supporting an industry that is doing this to our fellow humans. I think that as wise people, I think we need to take a stance here and shut this down, because there's a lot of people who, again, they're going to use this content, and the only way that we can promote its the ceasing of an industry like this, the adult entertainment industry, is to not participate. And then for the brave ones listening to this, take a stance and talk about it. When you're around men, just propose, ask, hey, how many, question, how many of you guys are still watching pornography and masturbating? And just open the discussion, because again, I think this is something that men don't openly talk about. And I would ask you with that, why don't we openly talk about it? Why is there some level of embarrassment around it? And I think, to me, and another thing, why are you hiding it? Right? You're not leaving it up on your computer. You're not leaving magazines out on the table, right? You're deleting your browsing history. You're hiding this behavior. What do you think that's about? Right? And most men are doing that, right? It's very rare that men are openly and blatantly using pornography. No, you're sneaking around and doing it when no one else is around. Why are you sneaking around? If it was really that okay, don't you think you would be open about it and not trying to hide it from everyone? So anyways, just some things to think about. But I would encourage you to take a stance on this one way or another, because I think not taking a stance opens you up for slips, relapses. And, I think these are great conversations to have with your wife, with your kids, and with your friends. I think society needs to decide where they stand on this and stop sweeping it under the rug, because I think there's a lot more negative effects than people realize.